you're under constant stress, it means that there are bottlenecks in your business that you're not addressing. Maybe you need to be staffing up more. Maybe you need to restructure. Maybe there's customers that you need to send away because they're causing you stress. Really identifying what it is and then saying, is this a short-term thing or is this a long-term impediment to my health and, frankly, the health of the business?
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'll begin this episode of Leadership with a quote. Here it is. 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. Sail away from the safe harbor. Catch the trade winds in your sails. Explore, dream, discover. Now, although that terse pronouncement may sound like something from a modern-day podcaster, it came from Samuel Clemens, also known as Mark Twain, the 19th century novelist and essayist. Many of Twain's tips have an amazing shelf life, and his counsel seems to be a perfect fit for today's growing legions of entrepreneurs. For countless reasons, more and more people are leaving the work for someone else world and hanging up their own shingles. My guest for this episode should be one of the new best friends for every entrepreneur. Cynthia Kay is herself a successful entrepreneur. She's founder of an award-winning media production and communications consulting firm and serves clients ranging from global Fortune 500 companies to small businesses and nonprofits. Cynthia has served as board chair for the National Small Business Association, and she's author of a terrific book titled Small Business, Big Business, Proven Strategies to Beat the Odds and Grow a Great Business. Cynthia, welcome to Leadership.
Well, Roger, I cannot tell you how delighted I am to be chatting with you, and I love the way you started this podcast because I believe some of those quotes that we hear are timeless. Can I share one with you that I love?
Please do.
George Bernard Shaw. One of the biggest problems in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Right. Yes.
I love that one.
Right. More people need to be aware of that, I think.
I would agree with you, absolutely.
Well, let me start with this question. Workplace upheavals brought about by the COVID pandemic seem to have nudged a lot of people toward entrepreneurship. What are your top 3 tips to people starting their own business?
Well, that's a great question. For one thing, I think as entrepreneurs, we often think that if we have this great business idea, a product or a service, that's going to be enough. That by the very fact that it's a great idea, you're going to be successful. And what I have seen is that sometimes those entrepreneurs are going to share that idea with family, friends, and they will encourage them. But it's really not that easy. There are a lot of companies that developed something really great that went out of business a year later. And part of the reason for that is, there's a couple of reasons. One, it may be a matter of timing. It may be that you're ahead of the pack and maybe the market's not ready for it. The other might be that you're entering a really, really crowded field and there's really nothing that is different than what, the competition is doing. So I think you have to really be honest about not just the product and service, but is the market really, really looking for what you are doing. So that's one. I think the second thing that I love to tell people is if you do not have great, overwhelming passion when you start your business, it's downhill all the way. And part of that is that I think, we get excited about it, but people are not ready for the fact that business is all consuming. Sometimes people leave that workplace thinking, I don't want to work for the boss anymore. And then you open a business and you discover you have 200 bosses.
Exactly. Right.
All of your clients. So, you have to be prepared to miss family occasions and not take vacations sometimes and do all of those things and do it gladly, because that's what it takes to really be successful in the long term. And then the last one is one that I think surprises a lot of people. And it's that I think you need to have an exit strategy before you open the doors. And the reason I say that is, and truth be told, I didn't, and I wish I had one, is that if you don't understand what you're growing, and know that, so for example, maybe you have a lifestyle business, right? You're not going to grow it to sell it because there's really nothing there to sell. You're the business. But if you have the exit strategy that says, I want to grow something to be able to sell it at some point, you're going to create a very different kind of an organization. So, I think those are a couple of things. Think about, are you different? Do you have the passion, and do you have an exit strategy?
Being an entrepreneur catches a lot of people off guard. There's a lot of glamour associated with it. And then suddenly, bam, in your face is all of this all-consuming work you need to do.
And so you have to be realistic about it. And I sometimes will try to discourage people and say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And then they go, no. And I go, well, you better before you open the doors.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, for someone who feels the entrepreneurial urge, what's the smart way to decide what kind of business to start?
I think, there are different schools of thought about this, right? So some people say you have to really know the business or be an expert in it. I know people who have opened, small businesses that didn't have any expertise in what they were going to be selling, but they got this inspiration and they did it. I personally believe that you have to really love the thing that you do. So when I opened my media company, I came from broadcasting, and I loved just the interaction with people and the making something that was so interesting. So, I think it's important to have background in it, to have some expertise. It's great if you've worked for someone else, made a few mistakes on someone else's dime.
Right.
Before you do it. But for certain, you have to look at, is what you are offering really going to be of interest to the marketplace? And so, you can love opening a business, doing something, but if no one's willing to buy it, then you're just doing it for yourself.
Right. Well, without clear understandings, partnerships risk turning sour. We've all seen that. Now, you advocate creating what you call a business prenup. I love that. Tell us how that works.
Well, some of this comes from experience. When I first started my business, I started it with a partner. And I will tell you, I got great advice. We did all of the things you're supposed to do. We hired lawyers and we set up the structure, and, we did all the typical kinds of things that you need to do. I made one big mistake. And the big mistake was that I didn't ask enough questions about the personal side of the relationship. And so, people have different working styles, and this can really cause a lot of friction. And so I think you need to set some time aside and ask questions like, How much do you care about your health? Are you taking care? How do you feel about the amount of risk that we might have to take? Are you willing to um, maybe take on some customers and do that work, even though it's not work you love doing, so that you can continue the business? Um, it's just all kinds of things. What does work-life balance look like? When you get into a partnership, if you're working more and you're loving it, but you see your partner doesn't really want to do that, that causes a lot of friction. So I think you have to have personalities that really complement each other. And I think you have to meet outside of work. And I think it's great to meet people's families and see what they're interested in, because the truth is, you really don't know someone until you work with them. And you are going to spend more time with them than anyone else for a very long time. So I actually have a checklist of questions in my book, Small Business, Big Success, and it's like, check these things off and talk about them and make sure that you're on the same page, because getting into business is easy. Getting out of it, just like a divorce, is hard.
Well, and the key, as you indicate, is talking about these things up front, clarifying
Absolutely.
expectations at the beginning, not 6 months into the partnership.
Yeah. And I think sometimes what we do is, when I started my business, I looked at my partner and I went, wow, he's got some business skills I don't have. We complement each other, right? And we did in that aspect. But a few years down into the partnership, it was very obvious we were not headed the same place.
Right. Well, hiring the right people is one of the most important tasks for a business owner. What's the key to ensuring that each hire is a good fit?
Well, so the reality is that sooner or later you make a mistake. I think that's really important to know. You just people present themselves in certain ways, and sometimes what you see is not what you get. I will tell you, one of the things that I think is really important is that people who work in smaller businesses are very different than people who work in large organizations. That's just because the small business, it's all hands on deck. It's much more fluid. It's a little less structured than a large corporation where people have very defined tasks. So you want to make sure that the person really wants to work in a smaller operation and wants to take some things on. The other thing that I do is I have a list of, skills, requirements, but I think the bigger thing for me is not those checkmark things, but things like, do they have a great attitude? Do they have problem-solving skills? Are they really motivated? One of the questions I ask people is, if you weren't doing this, what would you love to do? And if they say something else, they're not the right person, right?
Right.
So I think you can teach specific skills, but you cannot teach motivation and attitude and creativity. People have to have that. And the truth is, I learned this from one of my very large customers, is that sooner or later you will make a mistake, but when you make that mistake, you need to really move that person on quickly, because if not, it really hurts the whole organization, and especially if you have a small organization. So if the person's not the right fit, move them on.
What's your advice on how to scale a business? And how can a business owner know when it's a smart time to grow?
The first thing you have to do is, if you are looking to scale, you have got to make sure that you have the right team and systems in place, because you can get overwhelmed very quickly. So before we started looking to do business with very large customers, we made sure that we had the capabilities, the equipment, the systems in place before we went after those big contracts.
Right.
Because if you get a big contract and you don't deliver, you're done. So I think that's important. I think if you're looking to scale and to grow, you also today have to be very, very aware of the technology that you need, because technology is going to make you more efficient. It's going to make you more secure, right? Cybersecurity is a big thing when you're growing. So I think having those things in place. For some people, geography is important. And thinking about if they're trying to do business from the Midwest and they've got to fly to the West Coast, that may not be efficient. So scaling regionally maybe before you go national is one thing. And I always like to say, you kind of have to know, do you want to go slow and steady? Right? Which has been my preferred method to make sure that I'm not getting overwhelmed, but pushing yourself a little. And I always have said, like during COVID is a really great example. When other people were scaling back, we were ramping up.
Right, exactly.
I like to zig when others are zagging. We were buying equipment, we were putting new technology in, and so I think, for every business, it's going to be different, but you really have to make sure that you're scaling appropriately and that you've got the basic systems in place. Otherwise, you're going to, look at the brick and mortar stores that grew and grew and grew, and now they're all scaling back.
Yes. Well, let's get back to the subject that we kind of touched on earlier, and I would call that organizational culture. We were talking about making sure that a hire is a good fit. What can a business owner do, or a leader in any organization do, to help create and maintain a high-performance culture that engages the people in the organization?
Yeah. Building culture is something that I think has become much more important than it has been in previous decades. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that businesses understand how important people are. And so I think first of all, having a really clear understanding of what your cultural values are is important, even for small organizations. And I think it starts with the owner. I think a lot of times what happens is the owner's not clear about what kind of culture they are trying to create. And so the owner has to be open to sharing. So, for example, in my organization, we talk about business literacy. We talk about why it's important for everyone to have the opportunity to contribute, and we let them. I don't make all those decisions. I engage them to say, what do you think? Now, obviously, someone has to make the decision, but, bringing in employees and giving them basic literacy about the business, why we do things the way we do it. Why, for example, in my organization, we give away a lot of media production to nonprofits. And part of the reason we do that is that we feel like that's a responsibility we have. We know that nonprofits maybe can't afford to do some of those things. So we will give away. In fact, we asked some of our customers this past year to nominate a nonprofit that they love. And we're in the midst of producing something for them and giving them that. That's
Excellent.
A value that we have. And that builds culture because the employees are working on it and it's their project and they get to go out and do good. And so, I think it starts with the leader. You have to model it and you have to be very clear about what you value and make sure that you're hiring people who value that same thing.
Yes, clarity is, there's a theme here in what you're talking about. Clarity on everything. I've told my clients for years that when you're thinking about how to create and maintain a high-performing culture that engages your people, you need to be very clear about, number one, here's what we stand for.
Mhm.
But you also need to be clear about here's what we won't stand for. And you can ask the people at Enron how it worked when they were really clear on what they stood for, but they didn't talk about what they wouldn't stand for. And that's the downfall of a lot of organizations, large and small.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you one of the things that we are very clear about with our culture is that everything we do has to be done with integrity, that we don't cut corners. If we make mistakes, we admit to those mistakes. We, and then we reward people for doing the right thing.
Right.
That's the other thing. When they do something, I call it a shout out, and we tell people and we talk about it here. Why was that the right thing?
We're celebrating.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey there, Leadership listeners. We have something special for you. As a thank you for tuning in, we're offering you a free copy of Roger Dean Duncan's award-winning best-selling book, Change Friendly Leadership. In this book, you'll discover a proven framework for leading change that people will actually buy into, without all the stress and resistance that often stand in the way. You'll also learn powerful strategies to improve relationships both at work and at home, creating a healthier, more productive environment for everyone. To claim your free copy, just head over to changefriendly.com. Don't miss out on this opportunity to transform your good intentions into great performance. Again, grab your free copy of this best-selling book at changefriendly.com.
What strategies have you found to be most effective in building a loyal customer base?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I feel like it doesn't matter what business you're in. I feel that some of these will apply. I believe that it's important to pay attention to small customers, to give those customers the attention and the service, even if they're not buying a lot from you. And I'll tell you why. Those customers, when they get the kind of support that we can give them, get bigger and they stay with us. One of my biggest customers came to me because we did a tiny little project that nobody else wanted to do. A big production company said it's too small for us. We said, we'll help you with that. So I think paying attention to small customers or small opportunities, right, can help build a really loyal customer base. I think the other thing that we have tried to do is we have always tried to be ahead of the pack when it comes to saying to our customers, here's something you should be looking at. You're not doing this yet, but we're investigating it. Here's what we think we can do. Giving them options. Someone said to me that the reason they do business with us is that we provide them a non-corporate kind of mentality. We will tell them about doing new things instead of just doing what they always ask. And then I think the other thing is and I know this one's going to be controversial, but sometimes I will give stuff away. I will give away ideas. I'll sit down and, they haven't paid me to do that, but I'll sit down and I will talk through strategies with people about here's what you could do. Maybe say to them, you're not ready to do this yet. And I will say that to people. I can take your money, but you really don't want me to do this project. You're not ready. I think that builds loyalty.
Well, you're building trust and you're partnering with them.
Mm-hmm.
And that pays dividends down the road.
Yeah. Today a lot of companies are under huge financial stress. And I saw this years ago during the recession. We actually helped customers by saying to them, here's what we're going to do for you. We're going to scale back some things, but we're going to give you more of them. We knew they didn't have the budgets. And so we worked with them to help them get through those tough times. And when they did have the budgets, when budgets came back, they spent more money with us.
Right. Again, trust and a sense of partnership.
Absolutely.
How can entrepreneurs stay adaptable and agile in a constantly changing market?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm doing a presentation that I call Hate Change, Learn to Love It and Soar. And I think if you are someone who constantly has in your mind that you can't rely on what you did last year, that you have to always be looking at what you're going to do the next year. I call it staying hungry, right?
Right.
When I worked in broadcasting, one of my former bosses always had a saying. He said, nobody cares about what you did last rating period. They would care about what you do this rating period.
Exactly.
So I think constantly thinking about being your best. I think people need to consider themselves students, right? So listening to your podcasts, I've listened to, and I get ideas. Putting yourself in a place where you're constantly learning new things. I also think it's important to stretch and get outside of your circle and go do a different conference than you do every year. Read books you don't typically read. Watch things that you don't typically watch. Just kind of make yourself hungry again. And that, I think, is going to keep you adaptable.
It's constant learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, it's also good for our physical and mental health.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, when it comes to operations, you suggest thinking like big business. Give us a couple of examples of what that looks like in actual practice.
It's interesting because I think a lot of smaller businesses think they're too small, right? They consider themselves too small to think big like that.
Right.
I'll give you a simple example. They don't document things. Everything is in their head, right? So they're not documenting processes and procedures and frequently asked questions and things. So big businesses are very good at documenting. You look at systems like ISO 9001 and all of the certifications and things that businesses do. Small businesses need to pay attention to that. So that would be one thing. I think being digital, a lot of times they're still doing things manually. They're not automating some of their processes. Today, people are afraid of AI. They're afraid and I say, there's great places where it can be beneficial. There are places where it's not. But taking advantage of some of the technology that's out there to improve your processes, to sell on e-commerce platforms, to move things from on-premise to the cloud. I mean, all of those kinds of things. And then I think the other thing that small businesses or smaller operations don't consider, quite frankly, is safety and security. I think smaller entities think they're too small to be hacked or to, and the truth is, smaller companies are easy targets for a lot of fraud. And so you need protection just like big businesses do. And probably you need it more than a big business because it's going to be harder to recover when you're a smaller entity.
Exactly. Well, this sort of touches on what you talked about earlier, stress. Running a business can be stressful, of course. What do you advise owners of small businesses regarding how to manage stress and maintain balance, if that's even possible, between their personal and professional lives?
Yeah, that's, work-life balance is something people talk about all the time. I first think we need to stop thinking of stress as always being bad.
Yes.
Because I think stress can really be a great motivator if we reframe it in our minds, thinking
Yes.
about it as if we're feeling the stress, it means we need to do something, right?
Right. Right.
So thinking of it as moving you to action. So I think that's the first thing. I believe that the stress that business owners sometimes put on themselves is greater than what their employees and customers are putting on them. We take on things, we think we've got to be the first one in the morning and the last one to leave. Doing something like taking a break and going out for a walk at lunch, believe it or not, can be huge. I also am a big believer in that mind-body connection and believing that being physically active and being healthy is really, really important. And so a lot of times when I reach that point, I go to the gym and walk on the treadmill. I think that's, and giving yourself permission to do that is really important. But I also think if you're under constant stress, it means that there are bottlenecks in your business that you're not addressing. Maybe you need to be staffing up more. Maybe you need to restructure. Maybe there's customers that you need to send away because they're causing you stress.
Right.
Really identifying what it is and then saying, is this a short-term thing? Or is this a long-term impediment to my health and frankly, the hope of the business?
Well, and of course, it's important to surround yourself with people, frankly, who are smarter than you are about certain things. A lot of entrepreneurs try to do too much, and in some cases, it literally kills them when they really need to delegate some things and focus on those things that they do best. I know that's hard when you're starting a business, but sooner or later, and hopefully sooner, you need to surround yourself by people who can do some things better than you ever could.
I was talking to a business owner yesterday who told me that she has been doing 2 jobs for the last 2 years, hers and I said to her, why? And she goes, well, I can't find the right person, or I found the right person. And I'm like, no, that's too long to be doing that. Short term, yes, we do things we maybe don't want to do for a short period of time, but we need to constantly be moving ahead.
Yes. A lot of aspiring entrepreneurs like to watch TV shows like Shark Tank. What can they learn from a show like that?
Oh, I love to watch Shark Tank.
Yes, it's good.
It's so much fun, and I just love seeing the creativity of some of the things that people are making and designing. But well, I think the first thing is that you get a picture of how an investor is going to look at your company. And that is very different than perhaps the way that you look at your company. I think what happens with many is that they kind of get a dose of reality, because they maybe haven't done their homework.
Right.
They can't answer some simple questions like, what's the cost of acquiring a new customer, right? Or, why are you pursuing a brick and mortar strategy and an e-commerce strategy? Why aren't you focusing on some? I think it gives people a really good idea of what you need to have in place for someone to see you as attractive. I'm also going to say that it's very obvious to me when I see the show that some people shouldn't be looking for an angel investor. They haven't fully developed something enough. And quite honestly, you're going to have to give up a big chunk of your business.
Right.
And that's not for everyone. You now become accountable in a very different way. And if your business can't pay the kind of return that an investor wants, which is often more than
Right.
then maybe that's not really a good option for you. But I do love to hear some of the questions that they ask, and every once in a while I'll go, well, that's a really good one I hadn't thought of.
Right. It's kind of a master class in some
It
ways.
really is.
Cynthia, it's been said that entrepreneurship is living a few years of your life like most people won't, so you can spend the rest of your life like most people can't. Do you buy into that philosophy?
Well, the only thing that I might take issue with is when it says a few years.
Okay.
Because I do think that it takes more than a few years. You know, if you look at the statistics of how many businesses make it past the 15-year mark, not that many. I have been in business 37 years. That's a long time. And I would say that even to this day, I am spending time so that when I decide not to, I will be able to live the life I want. But I do think, I think the intent of that is absolutely correct, is that you are going to have to invest time and energy. And when you do that, there are great rewards. And the rewards aren't always financial. There are other rewards, right?
Sure.
Lots of rewards.
Let me ask this. What question did I not ask, but you wish I had? And how would you respond?
Well, I am a little surprised that you didn't ask this question, but one of the questions that I get from my peers often is, why are you still working?
Oh, yes, I get that too.
Do you get that question too?
I just tell people I totally flunked retirement.
Yes. Well, you know, and the question I get, because I do have a second home in Florida, is, you know, why aren't you sitting on a beach and eating bonbons? You know, why haven't you retired yet? But that's a question I get a lot. And I'm interested. You flunked retirement. That's what you tell them?
I do.
I love that. I might steal that one from you if I
go ahead. It's not copyrighted. You're
if I ever
welcome to use
decide
it.
to retire. You know, I often say to people when they ask that question, I go, first of all, if you still love what you are doing, why would you stop doing it? Right? And to me, it's not work. I love what I do. I love working with business owners. I love doing communications. I get energy from it. So why would I sit home and do nothing?
Thank you so much, Cynthia. You've certainly given our listeners a lot to consider when pursuing their entrepreneurial dreams. To learn more about Cynthia and her work, check out her profile on LinkedIn. You can also visit cynthiakaybiz.com. That's cynthiakaybiz.com. And to grab a free copy of my book, Change Friendly Leadership, go to changefriendly.com. That's changefriendly.com. In other episodes of Leadership, I share my exclusive conversations with many more top thought leaders who offer smart tips to boost your effectiveness in both your professional and personal life. My guests include superstars like Stephen M.R. Covey, Doug Conant, Dory Clark, Marshall Goldsmith, Heather Younger, Bill George, Dana Perino, Liz Wiseman, Guy Kawasaki, David Ulrich, and many others who have insightful things to say that you can put to good use immediately. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can stay informed on what's coming your way. Trust me, folks, you don't want to miss any of our episodes. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For the Leadership Podcast, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.